Why did the Vietnam War divide America? On the evening of January 30th, 1968, millions of Americans sat down to watch the news and saw something they could not process. Viet Cong sappers in black pajamas were fighting inside the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon. The most trusted voice in television, Walter Cronkite, looked straight into the camera 2 weeks later and said the war was unwinnable, a stalemate at best. If Uncle Walter had lost faith, the country had lost its war. In that moment, the Vietnam War stopped being a distant conflict and became a civil war inside the United States itself. How did a war 8,000 miles away tear the world's most powerful nation apart? The fracture began long before Tet. It began with a lie no one quite admitted. After World War II, the United States promised to stop communism anywhere it spread. When Vietnam split in 1954, Washington chose to back an unpopular Catholic regime in the mostly Buddhist South against a nationalist revolution led by Ho Chi Minh. By 1965, President Lyndon Johnson had sent 500,000 troops to keep a corrupt Saigon government afloat. Most Americans initially accepted the mission. Gallup polls in 1965 showed 61% approval. Few imagined what was coming. The draft was the first fault line. Every male aged 18-26 faced the lottery. College students received deferments. Factory workers and the poor did not. By 1967, African Americans, 11% of the population, suffered nearly 20% of the combat deaths. At the same time, Muhammad Ali refused induction, declaring, "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." His title was stripped, his career nearly destroyed. Working-class whites and black Americans were dying in disproportionate numbers, while the sons of the elite stayed home. Resentment festered. The war itself refused to follow any script Americans understood. There were no front lines, no decisive battles, no territory permanently taken. The enemy disappeared into villages by day and struck by night. Search and destroy missions burned hamlets and created more enemies than they killed. Body counts became the only metric of success, yet the numbers never added up. Every village, pacified, seemed to sprout Viet Cong again the next week. Generals spoke of light at the end of the tunnel. Soldiers on the ground called it the light of an oncoming train. Television made the contradiction impossible to ignore. This was the first war broadcast into living rooms every night. Viewers watched Marines with Zippo lighters torching thatched roofs. They saw 9-year-old Kim Phuc running naked down Route 1, her skin burning from napalm. They saw the Saigon police chief execute a bound prisoner with a pistol to the head. The images contradicted every official briefing. Credibility collapsed. 1968 became the year the country broke open. January. Tet Offensive. 70,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong attacked more than 100 cities and bases simultaneously. Militarily, the offensive was crushed within weeks. Psychologically, it was a catastrophe for America. If the enemy could strike the embassy after years of assurances, what was true? March. My Lai massacre revealed. American soldiers had murdered 500 unarmed villagers, mostly women, children, and old men. The Pentagon tried to cover it up for a year. When the story broke, horror turned to rage. April. Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated, cities burned from coast to coast. June. Robert F. Kennedy assassinated weeks after winning the California primary. August. Democratic Convention in Chicago. Police beat protesters in front of the cameras, while delegates inside nominated Hubert Humphrey, a supporter of the war. The whole world watched America devour itself. The anti-war movement grew from campus teach-ins to a national uprising. Hundreds of thousands marched on Washington. Students occupied university buildings. On May 4th, 1970, National Guardsmen fired into a crowd at Kent State University, killing 4 students. 10 days later, police killed 2 more at Jackson State College. The photographs, especially the girl screaming over a body at Kent State, became icons of a nation at war with its children. Politicians turned on each other. Richard Nixon won the presidency in 1968, promising peace with honor and a secret plan to end the war. Instead, he widened it, invading Cambodia in 1970 and bombing Hanoi at Christmas 1972. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, proved 4 administrations had systematically lied about the war's progress. Trust in government plummeted to levels never seen before or since. Veterans came home to silence or contempt. Many were spat on, called baby killers. In April 1971, more than 1,000 Vietnam veterans against the war threw their medals onto the Capitol steps. Lieutenant John Kerry asked the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, "How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?" The fall of Saigon on April 30, 1975, ended the war, but not the argument. Helicopters lifted the last Americans from rooftops while North Vietnamese tanks rolled into the presidential palace. America had lost 58,000 lives and spent $168 billion, over $1 trillion in today's dollars. Vietnam had lost perhaps 2 million. The country that once believed it could impose its will anywhere discovered the limits of power. Vietnam left scars that still shape America. It created a lasting distrust of government and the media. It ended the draft and forced the creation of an all-volunteer military. It passed the War Powers Act to restrain presidents. It made Vietnam Syndrome a phrase for reluctance to intervene abroad. Above all, it proved that when a nation loses faith in its cause and its leaders, no amount of firepower can win the war at home. The Vietnam War did not just divide America. It revealed the fault lines that were already there: class, race, generation, and the gap between those who decide and those who bleed. 50 years later, the echoes still sound every time the country debates sending its sons and daughters to war. The division did not end when the last helicopter lifted off the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon on April 30th, 1975. It hardened into something permanent. Veterans returned to a country that wanted to forget them. Many were told to remove their uniforms before landing so they would not be harassed. Jobs were scarce. The economy was in recession. The VA was overwhelmed. Post-traumatic stress was not yet an official diagnosis. Men were simply told to get over it. Suicide rates among Vietnam veterans climbed higher than combat deaths. The image of the broken, drug-addicted vet became a Hollywood stereotype, but for hundreds of thousands, it was daily reality. America argued over who lost Vietnam for decades. Conservatives blamed protesters, the media, and weak-willed politicians. Liberals blamed arrogant generals and lying presidents. Both sides claimed the war could have been won with different tactics or more resolve. The truth, that no amount of American firepower could create a legitimate popular government in Saigon, was too bitter to accept. The war reshaped politics forever. The Democratic Party fractured. Its labor civil rights anti-war coalition never fully recovered. Richard Nixon's silent majority became the base of a new Republican dominance in the South and among working-class whites. The culture wars that still rage over patriotism, protest, and who gets to define American values were born in the streets of 1968. It changed how America fights. The all-volunteer force replaced the draft. Future wars would be fought by professionals, not citizen soldiers, making it easier for leaders to commit troops without broad public consent. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 tried to restrain presidents, but every administration since has found ways around it. Vietnam Syndrome, the fear of another quagmire, held until the Gulf War of 1991, and even then the victory was deliberately quick and televised. The media learned a different lesson. After being blamed for losing the war, many outlets became more cautious, more embedded, more willing to echo official narratives in future conflicts. The CNN effect and 24-hour news were partly born from the realization that unfiltered images could turn public opinion overnight, and the country never fully reconciled with itself. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, dedicated in 1982, became a place of pilgrimage and tears, but it was controversial from day one. Some called Maya Lin's Black Wall a scar or a tombstone. It took another 13 years for a traditional statue to be added nearby. Even in mourning, America argued. Half a century later, the ghosts of Vietnam still walk the corridors of power. Every debate about intervention, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, begins with someone invoking or rejecting the lessons of Vietnam. Every protest march, every leaked document, every campus occupation carries echoes of 1968. The war that was supposed to stop communism ended up teaching America the limits of its own power and the fragility of its own unity. Vietnam did not just divide America in the 1960s and 1970s. It revealed divisions that had always existed, between rich and poor, black and white, young and old, hawk and dove, and gave them permanent form. The country has spent 50 years trying and failing to close the wound. That, more than any battle or body count, may be the war's longest-lasting legacy.